My father, the hero of our town, his last words to me weren't of love. He whispered in my ear.
They called the killer from 50 years ago a monster, a phantom. But they never suspected the hero standing right beside them. They never suspected me.
With that one sentence, my entire life collapsed. What would you have done? Please subscribe and press the like button, and stay with me until the end of my story. My name is Emily Carter, and for 60 years, I believed I knew my father. We all believe we know the people we love, don't we? We build our lives on the foundations they lay for us, trusting the ground beneath our feet is solid rock. My father, Benjamin Carter, wasn't just my foundation, he was the bedrock of our entire town of Maple Creek, Ohio. He was the war hero with the Purple Heart, the two-term town councilman who got the new library built, the Sunday school teacher who taught generations of children about honor and integrity. He was the man whose hand I held as a child, feeling utterly safe, the man whose wisdom I sought as an adult, always finding clarity. The story of my life was, in essence, the story of his goodness. But a story can change in the space of a single heartbeat. A foundation can crumble into dust, revealing a dark, cavernous sinkhole you never knew was there. My story is about that moment. It's about uncovering a truth so monstrous it threatens to erase not just the past, but the very person I thought I was. If you have ever felt the ground shift beneath you, if you believe that the most terrifying secrets are often the ones hidden in plain sight, then I ask you to join me on this journey. Please subscribe to my channel, press the like button, and be sure to turn on all notifications. You will want to witness what happens when a lifetime of love is forced to confront a legacy of evil. It began on a Tuesday, in the suffocating stillness of my father's bedroom. The late autumn light, weak and gray, filtered through the drawn blinds, striping the floral wallpaper in pale bars. The air was a sterile cocktail of antiseptic, old paper from his countless books, and the faint, sweet scent of decay that clings to the very ill. For 3 weeks, this room had been the center of my universe. My father, at 85, was finally losing his war with time. His body, once so strong and upright, was a shrunken outline beneath the crisp white sheets, a mere suggestion of the man he had been. The only constant sound was the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a fragile metronome counting down his final moments. I sat in the worn armchair by his bed, my hand clasping his. His skin felt like parchment, cool and thin, the blue veins a delicate map of a long life. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, had just finished checking his vitals.
He's resting comfortably, Emily. His pressure is low, but steady.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll stay with him.
She gave my shoulder a sympathetic squeeze and left the room, pulling the door almost closed, leaving us in a cocoon of shared silence. I watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a victory. My mind drifted back through the years, a slideshow of memories playing against the backdrop of the beeping monitor. Dad teaching me to ride a bike on Elm Street, his strong hands holding the seat until I wobbled away on my own. Dad in his uniform on Memorial Day, his gaze distant and solemn. Dad walking me down the aisle, his whisper a fortress of reassurance in my ear. He was my compass, my North Star. The unshakable constant. Then, his eyes opened. They weren't hazy or clouded by the morphine, but startlingly clear, a piercing blue that seemed to burn through the dimness of the room. He turned his head slowly on the pillow to face me.
Emily.
His voice was a dry rasp, a ghost of its former baritone authority.
I'm right here, Dad. Do you need some water?
I reached for the glass on the bedside table, but his fingers tightened on mine with surprising strength.
No, stay. Just listen.
I settled back into my chair, my heart aching with a familiar mix of love and anticipatory grief. I thought he wanted to share a final piece of fatherly advice, or perhaps a treasured memory. I was not prepared for the demolition that was to come.
I have not been a good man, Emily.
I managed a weak, sad smile. My father was a man of profound humility. Of course he would be assessing his own moral ledger at the end.
Dad, don't say that. You've been the best man I've ever known. You've been a pillar for this whole town.
His eyes did not soften. The intensity remained, and a flicker of something I had never seen before, something dark and agitated, stirred in their depths.
A pillar. Yes, a well-constructed lie is a pillar people can lean on for a very long time. My entire life, our life, has been a lie.
The words hung in the air, alien and wrong. This had to be the medication. The confusion Sarah had warned me about.
Dad, you're tired. You're not making sense. Let's not talk about this now. You should rest.
No, not now, not ever. There is no rest for me. And there will be none for you if I don't tell you.
He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. I held the water to his lips, and he took a small sip before pushing it away. His eyes locked back onto mine.
Do you remember, 50 years ago? The summer of '75? The papers were full of it. The whole state was terrified.
I frowned, searching my memory. I would have been a child. Faint, ghostly headlines swam in my mind. A sense of fear that had permeated the adults' conversations, hushed whispers I wasn't meant to hear.
You mean, the Whisperwood Strangler?
The name felt strange and illicit on my tongue. It was a local horror story, a boogeyman from a bygone era. A series of unsolved murders that had terrorized the small towns in our county. The killer was never found. He had simply stopped. My father nodded slowly, a single, deliberate movement. The heart monitor beeped on, steady, indifferent.
They said he was a monster. A phantom who slipped through the night. They had theories. A drifter, a madman. They searched for years.
I remember Mom being so afraid. You bought new locks for all the doors.
A strange, chilling smile touched my father's lips. It was a grotesque distortion of his familiar, kind expression.
A good father protects his family.
The room suddenly felt cold. The beeping of the machine seemed to grow louder, more insistent, each beep a hammer blow against my skull. My father's grip on my hand was now like a manacle.
Dad, what are you trying to say?
He took a breath, and it sounded like the scraping of stones. He held my gaze, and in that moment, I saw not my father, but a stranger. An absolute and terrifying stranger wearing his face.
The police never found a suspect. They never found a weapon. They never caught him.
He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was a taut wire.
They never caught me, Emily.
The words did not compute. It was like hearing a sentence in a language I didn't speak. My mind refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. I stared at him, my mouth agape, waiting for the punchline, for the sign that this was a terrible, morphine-fueled dream.
I am the Whisperwood Strangler.
Time stopped. The beep of the monitor, the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light, the scent of antiseptic, it all dissolved into a roaring vacuum. My father's face, the face I had loved and trusted for 60 years, became a mask. Behind it, a monster leered. The foundation of my world did not just crack, it exploded into nothingness. Every memory I had, every lesson he had taught me, every moment of pride I had ever felt was instantly corrupted, drenched in the blood of strangers. The hand holding mine was not the hand that had taught me to ride a bike. It was the hand that had. I couldn't finish the thought. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me, and I felt as though I was falling from a great height. My life, my entire identity, was a sham, a beautiful house built on top of a mass grave. This man, this revered icon, this loving father, was a lie. And I, his daughter, was the living embodiment of that 50-year-old hypocrisy. The nurse, Sarah, bustled back into the room, her cheerful demeanor a violent intrusion into the silent, frozen horror of the moment. My father's eyes were closed again, his face a placid mask of peaceful slumber, as if he hadn't just detonated my entire existence.
His heart rate spiked for a moment there. Did he get agitated?
I couldn't form words. My throat was a knot of cement. I managed a jerky, spastic nod, my eyes wide and unseeing.
It happens sometimes. A moment of confusion. Why don't you go get some coffee, Emily? I'll sit with him for a while. You look like you've seen a ghost.
A ghost. If only it were that simple. I had seen a demon, and it was wearing my father's face. I stumbled out of the room on legs made of glass, my hand clenched so tightly around the small, cold brass key he had pressed into my palm that its teeth dug into my skin. I walked through the familiar hallway of my childhood home, a place I had always associated with warmth and safety. Now, every object seemed to taunt me. The framed family photos on the wall were a gallery of lies. There was Dad, hoisting a 5-year-old me onto his shoulders, his face split in a wide, proud grin. Had he already killed by then? There we were on a family vacation to the Grand Canyon, my mother leaning against him, her expression serene. Was she sleeping next to a monster every night? The house itself felt complicit, its walls saturated with a terrible, 50-year-old secret. I made it to the kitchen and stood before the sink, my knuckles white as I gripped its edge. I wanted to be sick. I wanted to scream until my lungs tore. Most of all, I wanted to turn back time, to go back into that room and hear him talk about the weather, or baseball, or anything other than the monstrous truth he had just unleashed. Denial, thick and desperate, rose in my throat. It was the morphine. It had to be. He was a dying man, his mind ravaged by medication and fear, concocting a fantastical sin to confess. People did that, didn't they? Confessed to things they hadn't done? But his eyes, they had been so clear. And the key in my hand was so real.
My study. The floorboard under the desk. The leather box.
His words were an echo, a command from a man who was both my father and my tormentor. I had a choice. I could throw this key away, walk out of this house, and choose to believe his confession was nothing more than a dying man's delusion. I could cling to the pristine memory of Benjamin Carter, the town hero. Or I could open the door he had unlocked and face the truth, whatever it was. In that moment, I knew there was no real choice at all. Not knowing would be its own form of madness, a lifetime spent wondering. With a trembling breath that felt like swallowing shards of glass, I walked toward his study. The study had always been my father's sanctuary. The door was heavy oak, and it opened with a soft, familiar creak. The air inside was thick with his scent, old leather from his favorite armchair, the sweet aroma of the cherry pipe tobacco he'd given up years ago but that still clung to the curtains, and the dry, papery smell of books. Hundreds of books, lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Law texts, history tomes, classic literature. The collected knowledge of a man I thought was the wisest, most decent person on earth. A large globe stood in the corner, and on his massive mahogany desk sat a framed photograph of my mother and me, both of us smiling, frozen in a moment of blissful ignorance. This room had been my safe harbor, the place I came for advice on everything from homework to heartbreak. Now, it felt like the antechamber to hell. My movements were slow, robotic, as if I were wading through deep water. I knelt before the desk, the rich Persian rug soft beneath my knees. My fingers traced the intricate carvings on the desk's legs, a final, fleeting touch of a world that no longer existed. Then, my hand went to the floor beneath it. I ran my palm over the polished hardwood planks, one by one. And there it was. A subtle seam, a faint outline that was just a little too perfect. A floorboard cut with intention. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Using my fingernails, I pried at the edge. It was stuck fast. I looked around wildly and my eyes landed on a heavy brass letter opener on the desk, shaped like a sword. I wedged its tip into the crack and pushed. With a groan of protesting wood, the board lifted. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space, filled with the musty smell of trapped time. And inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, yellowed newspapers, was a box. It was a simple, dark brown leather box, perhaps the size of a shoebox, with tarnished brass clasps. It was utterly unremarkable, yet I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me, so intense that I nearly recoiled. This was it, Pandora's box. My hands shook so violently I could barely work the clasps. They finally sprang open with a dull click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I lifted the lid. On the very top lay his purple heart medal, nestled in its velvet case. Beneath it, a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon, letters my mother had written to him from home while he was away at war. For a dizzying second, relief washed over me. This was just a memory box. A collection of sentimental items. The confession was a hallucination, a terrible dream. Then I lifted the letters out. Beneath them, the nightmare became real. My breath hitched in my throat. I was looking at a curated collection of death. There was a single, small, pearl earring, the kind a young girl would wear. There was a cheap silver locket, tarnished with age. Inside, the spaces for photos were empty. There was a pressed gardenia, brown and brittle, its ghostly fragrance long gone. A driver's license belonging to a young woman named Sarah Jane Morris, her face beaming with a hopeful, 1970s smile. And there were photographs. Not crime scene photos, but pictures of them alive and happy. A laughing brunette on a swing set. A serious-looking blonde in a graduation cap and gown. A redhead squinting into the sun on a beach. Each one a life, a story, a universe of hopes and dreams, all extinguished and reduced to a macabre collection in a dusty box. These were my father's trophies. My stomach heaved, but my hand kept moving, as if controlled by some other, morbidly curious entity. At the very bottom of the box was a small, black, leather-bound diary. The kind you could buy at any drugstore. I lifted it out. Its cover was worn smooth with time. I opened it to a random page, my eyes scanning the script within. It was my father's handwriting. The same neat, precise, architectural script that had written notes of encouragement in the margins of my school essays, the same hand that had signed every one of my birthday cards with, "All my love, Dad." But the words were from a monster. October 12, 1975. Subject number 4 acquired tonight. The brunette from the diner. She was foolishly trusting. They all are. There was a moment, as the life faded from her eyes, of profound clarity. An understanding of the ultimate power. It is a purity the uninitiated cannot comprehend. I took a small token, the earring. It felt appropriate. The police will be like dogs chasing their own tails. They are looking for a madman, a creature of chaos. They will never think to look at the man who sits on the town council, the man who quotes scripture. Their blindness is my shield. I slammed the book shut, a strangled sob escaping my lips. Bile rose in my throat. This was not a confession. This was a boast. This was the cold, clinical, narcissistic ledger of a predator. He called them subjects. He reveled in his own cleverness, his own hypocrisy. The town hero, the pillar of the community, was a fraud. A carefully constructed performance that had lasted for over 50 years. He was a false, hollow god, and I had been his most devout worshipper. I knelt there on the floor of his study, the room of wisdom, surrounded by the evidence of his depravity. The pearl earring, the dead girl's license, the devil's diary in my lap. The truth was no longer a suspicion or a dying man's whisper. It was here, in my hands, a tangible, soul-crushing weight.
Is it true? What do I do with it?
I placed the diary back in the box. My movements were numb, detached, as if I were watching a stranger in a movie. I fit the trophies back around it, a meticulous curator arranging an exhibit of unspeakable evil. The pearl earring, the silver locket, the driver's license of the smiling girl. I closed the lid, the click of the clasps sealing the truth back into its leather tomb. I lowered the box into the floor, replaced the board, and pushed the heavy desk back into place, scraping a long, ugly scratch into the polished floor. A permanent scar, just like the one now carved into my soul. For the next few days, I lived in a fog. I became a ghost in my own home, performing the duties of a devoted daughter on autopilot. I would sit by my father's bedside, moisten his lips with a sponge, and read him passages from his favorite books of poetry. But every time I looked at his peaceful, sleeping face, I didn't see my father. I saw the cold, predatory eyes described in the diary. When I held his hand, I could feel the ghosts of the lives he had crushed. The secret was a physical weight, a tumor growing in my chest, making it hard to breathe. The house, once a comfort, was now a prison. Sleep offered no escape. The faces from the photographs in the box haunted my dreams. They didn't scream or accuse me. They just stared, their youthful eyes full of questions I couldn't answer, their silent presence a far greater condemnation than any shout. I was the keeper of their murderer's legacy. The secret I had to hide was not just my father's sin, but their stolen justice. On the fourth day, I couldn't bear the silence of the house any longer. Driven by a desperate, morbid need to understand the scope of his monstrosity, I went to the Maple Creek Public Library, the very library my father had championed, his name engraved on a brass plaque by the entrance. The irony was a physical blow. Inside, I didn't go to the sunlit fiction aisles. I went to the basement, to the stuffy, quiet room that housed the town archives and the microfilm machines. For hours, I scrolled through the crackling, black and white images of the Maple Creek Gazette from the summer and fall of 1975. And there they were. The victims. My father's subjects.
Whisperwood Strangler.
I focused on the articles about the girls themselves. Sarah Jane Morris, whose driver's license I had held in my hand, was a nursing student at the county college. Her mother was quoted in an article, her words a raw wound on the faded page. She just wanted to help people. She would never hurt a soul. Who would do this? Who? Another victim, Linda May, was only 17. Her high school yearbook photo showed a girl with bright eyes and a shy smile. She was on the debate team and had a scholarship to Ohio State waiting for her. Her father, a farmer from the next town over, told the reporter he couldn't sleep anymore. He just kept walking the fields at night, calling her name. The unending pain of these families rose from the screen like a heat haze. For 50 years, they had lived in the agony of the unknown. They had no answers, no closure, no justice. Their grief was a living thing, while my father, the source of it all, was being allowed to die peacefully, revered as a hero. The injustice of it all was a suffocating shroud. I was his daughter. I was the only person on earth who could give them the truth. And I was hiding it. The next morning, I was sitting in the daily grind, the town's main coffee shop, trying to pretend my world wasn't imploding, when a man approached my table. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with a shock of untidy white hair, a rumpled tweed jacket, and eyes that were far too sharp and observant for his otherwise disheveled appearance.
Miss Carter? Emily Carter?
I'm sorry, do I know you?
Forgive the intrusion. My name is Alistair Finch. I was a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer for 40 years. Now I just write a bit, here and there. Old habits.
I felt a prickle of unease.
What can I do for you, Mr. Finch?
I'm doing a piece, a 50-year retrospective, on the Whisperwood Strangler case.
The coffee cup trembled in my hand, rattling against the saucer.
That was a long time ago.
It was, but stories like that have a long shadow. They never really go away. I was a cub reporter back then, assigned to the case. It's always bothered me, the one that got away. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about what the town was like back then. Your father, Benjamin Carter, was on the town council. He was a vocal advocate for safety, for the investigation. A real leader.
My throat was dry.
My father is very ill, Mr. Finch. He's in hospice care. I don't think he'd be able to recall much.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. A great man. I don't need to speak with him. I'm more interested in the atmosphere, the feeling in the town. For my article.
He was lying. This wasn't just for an article. This was something more. I could feel it. The net was tightening, a net I didn't even know existed until this moment.
People were frightened. We all were. It was a terrible time.
Indeed, terrible. I've been going through the old case files. It's fascinating what you find with fresh eyes. For instance, all the victims were last seen within a 10-mile radius of Maple Creek. The police always assumed it was a drifter, passing through. But I think they were wrong. I think it was one of your own. Someone people knew and trusted. Someone who could get a young woman to lower her guard.
Every word was a carefully aimed dart. He was watching me, gauging my reaction. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt the overwhelming urge to run, to flee this folksy coffee shop and the polite, predatory old man sitting across from me.
That's a terrible thought.
It is. The fourth victim, Sarah Jane Morris. She was found near Miller's Pond. She'd been strangled, like the others. But a witness, a teenager who was too scared to come forward at the time, recently told me he saw a car parked on the access road that night. A dark green Ford Galaxy. A respectable family car.
He let the words hang in the air. We both knew my father had owned a dark green Ford Galaxy in 1975. It was the car he drove me to my piano lessons in.
Lots of people owned that kind of car, Mr. Finch.
They did. But this is the interesting part. The witness said the man driving had a small scar on his left cheek. Like a nick from a shaving razor.
He stopped, his eyes locked on mine. He was looking for a flicker of recognition, a tell. A small scar on his left cheek. My father had one. He'd told me he got it from shrapnel in the war. I felt the blood drain from my face. The suspicious eyes of this old reporter were seeing through 50 years of lies, and now they were fixed on me, trying to see if the lies had been passed down from father to daughter.
Mr. Finch, my father is a decorated war hero and one of the finest men this town has ever known. He is on his deathbed. I will not have you, or anyone, tarnish his reputation with these insane theories.
Good men can do terrible things, Ms. Carter. Sometimes, the better the man, the more terrible the things he's capable of hiding. Your father was above suspicion. That's what would have made him the perfect monster.
He placed a business card on the table.
I'm staying at the Maple Creek Inn. If you remember anything that might be helpful, please call me. I intend to find the truth. One way or another.
He stood up and walked away, leaving me alone at the table, his words echoing in the cheerful, coffee-scented air. The secret was no longer safe in its box under the floorboards. It was out. It had a hunter. And that hunter was now watching me. Alistair Finch's visit had cracked the hermetic seal on my horror. The secret was no longer a static artifact buried in the past. It had been reanimated, and it now had a hunter. My private, suffocating agony was about to be dragged onto a public stage. 2 days after our meeting, as a storm gathered in the bruised twilight sky, my father died. There was no grand, final confession, no whispered plea for forgiveness that might have offered me some sliver of closure. One moment, the heart monitor was beeping its steady, fragile rhythm. The next, it flatlined into a single, piercing, continuous tone that seemed to announce the end of the world. He simply stopped. He had slipped out of life as quietly and unobtrusively as he had once slipped through the shadows of Whisperwood 50 years ago. I stood beside the bed, watching the nurse, Sarah, perform the gentle, final duties of her job with a quiet efficiency. I felt a profound and unsettling stillness settle over me. The grief I had braced myself for, the grief I thought I should feel, was entirely absent. It was as if I were grieving for a man who had already died long ago, the father I had worshipped, the hero I had believed in. That man had perished in my heart the moment he'd uttered his confession. The body on the bed was just the empty vessel of a monster, a hollowed-out replica of my father. Its passing only meant one thing. The terrible weight of his secret, in its entirety, had now settled squarely and irrevocably onto my shoulders. The town's reaction was a performance of collective sorrow, a tidal wave of casseroles, flower arrangements, and heartfelt platitudes that threatened to drown me. The phone rang with a relentless, punishing rhythm. "Emily, dear, it's Martha from the church bake sale. We are all just heartbroken. Your father was a saint. A true saint. I'm bringing over my green bean casserole." A saint. I mumbled a thank you and hung up, my hand trembling. In the kitchen, the counter was already crowded with dishes brought by grieving neighbors, symbols of a communal sorrow I could not access. It felt like they were mourning a stranger. The mayor issued a formal statement, which was printed in full on the front page of the Gazette under the headline, "Maple Creek's North Star Goes Out." The article lauded his war record, his civic achievements, his decades of unimpeachable moral leadership. The process of honoring the town's hero had begun, and I was the unwilling high priestess of this fraudulent ceremony. Every sympathetic glance was an accusation, every "he was such a good man" neighbor, was a hot poker against my soul. Then came the meeting I had been dreading more than any other. Reverend Michael, the gentle, silver-haired pastor of the First Presbyterian Church, sat with me in our funereal living room. The air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies. "Emily. The town is looking for a way to process this loss. To celebrate his life." I was remembering just yesterday, that time we were trying to raise funds for the new youth center wing. We were thousands of dollars short. Your father, without a moment's hesitation, wrote a personal check for the full amount. He only asked that it remain anonymous. Such humility. Such grace. I nodded, a frozen doll, my mind screaming. I remembered that time. It was the autumn of 1974, just before the first girl disappeared. Was that his penance? Or worse, was it a self-serving investment in his own camouflage? The pastor continued, oblivious. "It would mean so much to everyone, to hear from you at the service. A daughter's tribute. You were the light of his life. No one knew his heart better than you." The irony was so acidic it burned my throat. No one knew his heart better than you. I was the sole living person who knew his heart was a black, twisted, corrupted void. To stand before the town, to speak of my father, it was a task beyond monstrous. I was the daughter who must give the eulogy.
I don't know if I can, Reverend. The words.
Of course, you can. You have his strength in you. For the next 2 days, I secluded myself in his study, the scene of my world's collapse. I sat at his massive mahogany desk, a single sheet of paper and a pen before me. The blank page was a mirror, reflecting my own terrified emptiness. I had to write something. But what? I tried, my hand shaking, to write the lie. My father, Benjamin Carter, was a man of integrity. The words felt like poison on the page. I wrote about his love for my mother, his devotion to me, his service to the town. With every sentence, I felt like I was helping him kill those girls all over again, burying their memory under a mountain of beautiful, elegant falsehoods. I threw the pen down, bile rising in my throat. Then, driven by a furious, desperate need for catharsis, I took out another sheet of paper and wrote the truth. I wrote about a leather box and the trophies kept within. I wrote the names of his victims. I quoted the cold, narcissistic entries from his diary. The words poured out of me in a torrent of rage and grief. When I was done, I read it back, my own handwriting looking alien and terrifying. I pictured myself reading this eulogy in the church. I saw the looks of confusion turning to horror, the gasps, the screams. I saw the destruction of a town's identity, the ruin of my own life. It was a choice between my conscience and my silence, between two different kinds of hell. It was the most terrible choice in the world. The day of the funeral was cruelly beautiful, the autumn sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The First Presbyterian Church was a cathedral of lies. Every pew was filled. The mayor, the sheriff, the entire town council sat in the front rows, their faces somber masks of public grief. I sat behind them, a black veil thankfully hiding my face, my gloved hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails dug into my palms. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows depicting saints and angels, bathing the scene in an aura of sanctimonious hypocrisy. And then I saw him. In the back, standing in the shadows by the heavy oak doors, was Alistair Finch. He wasn't dressed like a reporter. He wore a simple dark suit. He just watched me, his gaze unwavering, a silent reminder that the truth had an advocate, whether I wanted it to or not. The service began. One by one, men I had known my entire life walked to the pulpit to sing my father's praises. Benjamin Carter was more than a councilman. He was the moral compass of Maple Creek. When this town was gripped by fear, 50 years ago, he was the voice of strength and resolve, demanding action, comforting the terrified. Next came an old, stooped veteran, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke of my father's courage under fire. He spoke of a man who would risk his life for his comrades. Each tribute was another shovel of dirt on the graves of his victims, another layer of gold paint on a rotten sepulchre. Reverend Michael delivered a sermon on a life well lived, on a righteous servant of God now called home to his just and peaceful reward. I felt a cold, hysterical laugh building in my chest and had to bite down hard on my lip, the sharp pain the only thing keeping me grounded. Then came the moment that had haunted my every waking second. And now, his loving daughter, Emily, would like to share a few words in tribute. A profound hush fell over the packed church. Hundreds of pairs of sympathetic, expectant eyes turned to me. I could feel Alistair's stare from the back like a physical force. My legs felt like lead as I stood and made the impossibly long walk from the pew to the pulpit. The click of my heels on the stone floor was a death knell. My mind was a vortex of flashing images, my father reading me a bedtime story, then a page from his diary detailing a kill, my father hugging me at my wedding, then the dead-eyed smile of Sarah Jane Morris on her driver's license. I reached the podium. My shaking hands rested on the smooth, worn wood of the lectern, right next to a large, open Bible. I looked out at the sea of faces, my neighbors, my teachers, my friends. They were all waiting for me to give them one final, beautiful memory of the man they adored, a story to seal his legacy of goodness forever. Then my gaze traveled to the shadows in the back of the church where the reporter stood, a silent juror waiting for a verdict. And beyond him, in the dark theater of my mind, I saw them. The young, hopeful faces of the victims, their eyes pleading, waiting for their names to finally be spoken, for their stories to finally be told. My conscience, my silence, to reveal or to bury? The world narrowed to this single, unbearable point in time. I took a breath, the funereal lilies choking my lungs. I leaned toward the microphone. I opened my mouth to speak. I took a breath, the cloying scent of lilies filling my lungs. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and for a fleeting second, the lie felt so much easier. The comforting, beautiful lie. I could praise the man they all believed in, and in return, they would comfort me, and we could all bury the truth together in that polished mahogany box. My mouth opened, and the first words that came out were a concession to that lie, a final, fleeting glimpse of the life I was about to incinerate.
My father, Benjamin Carter, was a pillar of this community. He was a man who taught me the value of integrity, of truth, of protecting the innocent. He was a hero to this town, and a hero to me. That is the story of his life. The story we all know.
I paused. The silence in the church was absolute. I let the weight of that lie settle over the room one last time.
And it is a lie.
A collective gasp rippled through the pews. It was a sound like the tide pulling away from the shore, a sharp, shocked intake of breath. Reverend Michael's beatific smile froze and crumbled. In the back, I saw Alistair Finch straighten up, his eyes now blazing with intensity.
The man you are honoring today was a performance. The real man was a monster who preyed on the innocent he swore to protect. You all remember the summer of 1975. You remember the fear. You remember the girls who were stolen from their families. You called the man who did it the Whisperwood Strangler.
A wave of confused, angry murmurs swept the church. What is she talking about? She's lost her mind with grief. I raised my voice to be heard over them.
You are here today to bury the Whisperwood Strangler. His name was Benjamin Carter.
Pandemonium. Mayor Thompson shot to his feet, his face purple with outrage. This is a disgrace. Emily, stop this at once. But I would not be stopped. This was not for them. This was for the girls.
I will not stop. His victims deserve to have their names spoken in this church far more than he does. Sarah Jane Morris, Linda Mae Peterson, Catherine Byers, and Anne-Marie Dubois, whose body was never even found. They were not subjects. They were daughters. They were sisters. And he was their killer.
The chaos was absolute. People were shouting, some crying, others storming out in disgust. The honor of their town, their hero, was being immolated before their very eyes, and they could not bear it. The price of truth was immediate and brutal. As I stood at the pulpit, watching the community that had nurtured me turn into a snarling mob, I felt the full weight of my family's name, once a badge of honor, crumble into ash. The Carter family honor was dead and buried. I had killed it. In the ensuing days, my life became a living hell. My father's name was not just ruined, it was scoured from the town's history with a furious, vengeful passion. The brass plaque at the library was torn from the wall. His portrait in the town hall was removed. The Carter name became a synonym for betrayal, a local curse. My phone rang not with condolences but with threats. My house was besieged by news vans, their satellite dishes like vultures circling a carcass. I was a pariah, the madwoman who had desecrated a sacred memory. But Alistair Finch's story, quoting my eulogy in full, ran in the Cleveland Plain Dealer and was picked up by the national news. The state police, forced by the media frenzy, reopened the 50-year-old cold case. I led them to the study, to the loose floorboard, to the leather box. The truth, once unleashed, could not be contained. The driver's license, the locket, the earring, they were all tested. DNA technology, a science fiction in 1975, confirmed what I already knew. The evidence was irrefutable. My father was the monster. My horrifying eulogy had been the absolute truth. About 3 months later, after the media storm had quieted to a dull roar, Alistair Finch called me. He had arranged a meeting. It was in a small, neutral ground coffee shop in a town 50 miles away. When I walked in, an old man with tired, watery blue eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis was sitting in a booth.
Emily Carter? I'm Walter Peterson. Linda Mae was my little sister.
My breath caught in my chest. Linda Mae. The girl with the shy smile in the graduation photo. This was the first time I had met the family of one of his victims. I sat down, my hands trembling.
Mr. Peterson, I am so sorry.
He looked at me for a long time, his gaze searching my face.
You have nothing to be sorry for, miss. What you did, standing up in that church. That took a kind of courage I can't imagine. For 50 years, my mother went to her grave believing Linda had run away. That she had abandoned us. My father, he just wasted away. Not knowing, it's a different kind of killer. It eats you from the inside out. You gave us the truth. It's a terrible truth, but it's ours now.
I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. I pushed it across the table.
He kept things. Trophies. The police have most of them, for evidence. But they let me have this. I believe it belonged to her.
With shaking fingers, he opened the pouch and poured its contents into his palm. It was a simple, silver locket. He stared at it, and a single, silent tear traced a path through the weathered landscape of his cheek.
Our grandmother gave this to her. She never took it off.
In that moment, I wasn't the daughter of a killer. I was a witness. A conduit for a truth that was 50 years overdue. By returning this small piece of stolen life, I felt the first, tiny release from the crushing weight of my father's sins. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something quieter, something more practical. It was the beginning of washing away the evil he had left behind. It's been a year now. I sold the house in Maple Creek, that museum of horrors. I moved to a small, anonymous town by the coast where no one knows the name Carter. I am no longer Benjamin Carter's respectable daughter. That person died in the church along with his heroic legacy. My new name is simply Emily. A woman with a past, a woman who carries a terrible story. I am the woman who told the truth. My life is quiet now. The ghosts of the victims no longer haunt my dreams. I think they are at peace. I am not happy, not in the way I once understood it. But I am not living a lie. And in that, I have found a different kind of strength, a different kind of peace. My father's story was one of darkness and deception. I have chosen to make my own story, what's left of it, about truth. The journey to uncover the truth, especially within our own families, can be the most terrifying journey of all. It can cost you everything you thought you knew and loved. But I am here to tell you that it is a journey worth taking. If you believe in the power of truth to bring justice, even after 50 years of darkness, please, share my story. Subscribe for more stories that are not afraid to confront the secrets that lie hidden in plain sight. And leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done?